The Baltimore Ravens got a massive pre-free agency gift from the NFL. We talk about that as well as the Ravens getting ripped by Booger McFarland for their failures. We talk about that and so much more coming up next on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here on this Thursday, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day, your first listen every day as well, free and available on all podcasting platforms. So in video form on YouTube, you can like and subscribe to the channel. In audio form, you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts 5 days a week without fail on Locked On Ravens of daily Ravens coverage. Plus, we do have bonus episodes on the weekend sometimes when the headlines present themselves to go live after every single Ravens game, after every single piece of Ravens big news. And we have some free agency plans this year. I'm really excited to dive into that. We'll have reactions to all the Ravens free agency moves, the Ravens losing players, gaining players, trades, the whole 9 yards. So a lot of content coming your way on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to tell a friend, tell a family member that we are here for them as well. I'm really excited for today's episode because speaking of free agency, the Ravens got a massive free agency gift, or at least pre-free agency gift from the NFL, as did all the teams, but this for the Ravens helps them out quite a bit. So we're going to talk about that in the first part of the show. Then Booger McFarland ended up ripping the Ravens for their failures, particularly in the playoffs. So we'll get to what he had to say in the second part of the show and kind of take that conversation into what the Ravens do need to do better. I know we've had iterations of this conversation before, but I want to take it a bit of a different angle, I guess, from that, what we've done in the past. And then finally, in the final part of the show, we'll talk about some early biggest draft needs for the Ravens, because you talk about free agency, talk about the draft. I do think that the needs actually are different, and I'll talk about what I mean in the final part of the show there. So let's dive into it. The Ravens getting a massive free agency gift from the NFL. Again, all teams got this. This was not necessarily Ravens exclusive, but I do think it helps the Ravens more than it does some other teams. Now, it's really good news because the NFL informed teams the 2025 salary cap will fall in the range of $277.5 million to $281.5 million. That coming from Dan Graziano of ESPN. That is way up from last season's $255.4 million cap, and it will have increased by more than $53 million over the last 2 seasons. So obviously there's a lot that we can thank for that. TV deals and revenue deals being the biggest one of those, ad money coming in, and there's a lot. But this is actually, and this coming from Brian McFarland, Ravens salary cap does an amazing job with Ravens-centric cap content. Most have been using the 270 to 275 million range for the cap this season. So now you're getting at least 5 to 10 million, maybe even 11 to 12 million, depending on if it falls on the low end or the high end of that 277 to 281 or 278 to 282. If it falls on the higher end of that scale, you might be getting, based off of projections that we've gotten for teams throughout the course of the last couple of months, we might be talking about $10 million more, $12 million more. Now, for teams like the Commanders and other teams that already have a ton of cap space, that extra 5 to 10 million helps, but you already have so much cap space. It's not make or break for you. Like, they were already going to go out there and sign a bunch of players to big deals. The 5 to 10 million doesn't change that. They're able to re-sign their guys and do this. They're not up against it. But for teams like the Ravens that were up against it and past cap estimations based off of the old kind of salary cap that people were expecting, that 272, 275, 270, the Ravens were expected to have anywhere from $6 to $9 million without any restructures or extensions or whatnot. You now factor this in, and that bumps the Ravens up to maybe $10 million in cap space, maybe $15 million in cap space on the high end of that spectrum, maybe $18 million in cap space to $20 million. That's a big deal, because not only does it mean that you maybe don't have to push as much money down the line with restructures, extensions, but it means that, I know a lot of people go straight to, okay, they can go sign guys from the outside now, which, to an extent is more true than it was, I still wouldn't expect the Ravens to go out there and have the offseason where they go sign Marcus Williams, Morgan Moses, Zadarius Smith before that whole thing fell apart. I'm not expecting that. But when you're talking about a base number for the Ravens before you tinker with any contracts, if you talk about a base number of anywhere from $10 to $20 million compared to $5 to $10 million, that is a big shift in what the Ravens could do, because does that mean the Ravens now have enough money to bring back Ronnie Stanley comfortably if they want to do that? Could they go and give a contract to a guy in free agency that maybe you weren't expecting them to have the money for, but there are other avenues for Baltimore to create cap space? So here are some ways, and we'll dive into this in a lot more detail as the weeks go on before free agency starts. It's going to creep, but it always does every single season. Free agency creeps up on me, and I'm talking here in February, and then the next day it is like the day before free agency starts. I don't know how it happens every single season, but here are some ways the Ravens can create cap space. Obviously, the big one is releasing Marcus Williams. They're going to do this as a post-June 1 release, and that is essentially written in stone because the Ravens ended up restructuring Marcus Williams in his deal to be able to facilitate that. Clearly, it didn't work out in Baltimore. It was great for the first couple games, but injuries and obviously poor play last year, it's not working. So Marcus Williams is going to be gone. That created nearly $10 million in cap space for the Ravens, and then after June 1st, they'll get another $2.1 million in cap space. I think a move that is expected to me, and I know not a lot of people are talking about this right now, but releasing Arthur Millette is a pretty likely move in my opinion. He's going to open up $2.25 million in cap space, and there's not going to be a ton of dead money on there either. So I think it's a pretty no-brainer move. I think that you can get production, and this is kind of what people use. It is essentially 80% of production for 20% of cost, and I think with the Ravens and their options in that secondary, they don't need Arthur Millette there. I expect them to bring in a couple of guys, whether it be free agency or the draft. So I feel like Arthur Millette is probably on the way out this offseason. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but I'd say it's pretty likely. Another one that I think could be on the horizon for the Ravens is trying to find a way to extend Derrick Henry. Obviously, Henry's made it very clear that he wants to spend the rest of his career in Baltimore. Cap hit for Henry right now is just under $13 million. So for these extensions, and you can talk about maybe extending Marlon Humphrey, extending Anafe Owe or Darius Washington. You could even go crazy with Lamar Jackson. That to me, Lamar's more of a restructure in my opinion. But the way that this works is, so for example, let's just use Derrick Henry as our main example. That cap hit for Derrick Henry, he has 1 year left on that deal, just under $13 million. If you were to extend Derrick Henry, add an extra year or two onto that deal, you can spread that cap hit out over the length of the rest of that contract. That's why when the Ravens signed Derrick Henry to that 2-year deal, they made the first year cap hit lower so they could afford him on their books. And then it obviously spikes up. So the Ravens, they like to backload those deals. I think that's a very smart thing to do. A lot of teams do it so that they can facilitate exits of big contracts. And then the other big contracts they get on their books, those can just slot in there when the cap money goes up. So that's the way that Baltimore can do that. But with the way that void years have come up, the Ravens have now done that a ton with their contracts. The extra 5 to 10 to whatever, 5 to 10 to $12 million, that can help them maybe not push as much money down the line, not have the need to restructure somebody, because obviously, and the Saints do it every season. Ross Jackson, a Locked On Saints, he and I joke about this all the time. It's like the Saints somehow are $10 billion over the cap every single offseason, and they just keep kicking that can down the road, and somehow they figure out a way to get over it. But at some point or another, that will catch up to them. But on the other hand, the cap isn't real, and I think we all understand and we all know that. But good GMs find ways to create cap space, and Eric DeCosta certainly is a good GM, and he has done that over the years. And I think for Baltimore, this extra 5 to 10 million gives them breathing room. Does this define their offseason of like, oh yeah, they're going to go out there, and if Joey Bosa gets cut, they're going to sign Joey Bosa to a $100 million contract? No, that's not exactly how that's going to work here. The Ravens still have to be smart with their money. They still have to be able to sign their draft class, which right now, by the way, is 11 picks. That's a lot of picks. So for me, it is a free agency gift, and it's a big one, because when you're operating under a certain assumption, and all of a sudden you're going to get more money here. I think to me, the biggest takeaway or the move that I could see happening the most, and I already mentioned it, is Ronnie Stanley coming back. I think that with the way that he's projected, Spotrac has him projected right around $20 million per season, $21 million per season. If the Ravens want Ronnie back based off of the year that he had, which, by the way, he stayed healthy this past season. He was pretty good this year compared, he wasn't prime Ronnie Stanley, but, he was very, very good. An offensive lineman, good offensive linemen are very hard to find. This honestly goes into the final part of our show, so we're going to continue this conversation then. But I wouldn't be shocked if the Ravens now bring back Ronnie Stanley, and maybe he takes a little bit of a hometown discount to stay. But even if he doesn't, Baltimore could use some of the funds, because I do expect them to announce some extensions here down the line and some restructures to free up some money. I feel like Stanley could come back now. At the time, even yesterday, before we knew this news, I wasn't really sure that the Ravens going to bring back Ronnie. I think we all assume that Brandon Stephens is probably as good as gone, and Patrick McCary, if he gets, priced out of Baltimore, that could certainly be an option. Ronnie was the one where it's like he's the most likely, but is it even that likely? And now I think that it is likely. No Isaiah, by the way. Extend Isaiah likely. That's another guy, honestly, they could extend here. Isaiah's a guy, you're going to look at him. You're going to look at Mark Andrews, who's another guy for that extension, cut, trade, whatever it may be. I think the Ravens should extend Isaiah likely. What does that mean for Mark Andrews? Well, we know the Ravens could save a lot of money by trading him about $11 million. So I'm not saying that is going to happen. I think the Ravens should honestly restructure Mark and figure that out. Maybe they could tack on another year to his deal to kind of shift that cap hit. It's a $16.9 million cap hit right now. That's not a small amount of money. But, I think for me, it is likely that the Ravens do bring back Ronnie Stanley now, or I guess likely might not be the right word. I would say it is more likely than it was that the Ravens are going to bring back Ronnie Stanley with this news. But other extension candidates could pop up here, and guys that might not even be on our radar right now, like a Travis Jones is extension eligible. Could they sign him to an extension? Now, you could get him signed early, much like Isaiah Likely, because here's the thing. For some of these guys on their rookie deals entering the last year of those contracts, if they have great contract seasons, price is going up. Price is going up. And honestly, the price for Likely is probably already much higher than it was. Same with Travis Jones. So those are two guys I would love to see the Ravens sign to an extension, or Darius Washington as well. A lot of guys we can talk about that for extension-wise, but we'll continue that in the third part of the show because it does go hand in hand with draft needs versus free agency needs. But coming up in the second part of the show, Booger McFarland ended up roasting the Ravens for their failures, particularly in the playoffs. So be sure to stay tuned. We got plenty coming your way on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by TurboTax. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today, an expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Back here on Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this Thursday edition of the show. Getting closer to the weekend. We are almost there. Obviously going to have an episode for you tomorrow on Locked On Ravens as we get closer and closer to free agency. And a lot of moving parts here on the show as, again, I'm upgrading the audio, I'm upgrading the video. We're doing a lot, so a lot of those parts coming together. They all have to come together at the same time. So I'm kind of attacking one, then attacking the other, but it's all coming together nicely, and I'm really looking forward to that. Next week, first part that comes together, getting new thumbnails. We're going to do new thumbnails, so I'm really excited for that. I was going to try to do it this week. Couldn't get it all together. I have it together now. I have an idea, so we're going to do that next week. So if you see a bit of the thumbnail look on YouTube, audio form, it's not going to affect anything, so don't worry about that. But for video form, it's going to be a little bit different look when you click on the video, but it's going to be a good look, and I'm excited for it. So be sure to stay tuned for what that actually looks like. So now let's get into Booger McFarland, what he had to say over on ESPN roasting the Ravens for their playoff failures. And look, I know this is a common theme, and I don't necessarily think that, saying the Ravens have underperformed in the playoffs is this horrible, terrible thing, because it is true. I mean, especially over the past 2 seasons with the teams that the Ravens have had. I mean, you look back at that 2023 team, and that to me was the best team in the league. And obviously the best team in the regular season doesn't always win the championship, and playoffs, you have to perform. It doesn't matter once the regular season ends. And that's what happens. Same thing in 2024, where the Ravens, they had struggles, but they really came together after their bye week last month and a half of the season. And they fall. They don't get the job done in the playoffs. So Booger McFarland ended up talking with Louis Riddick and went over some things the Ravens could do to improve their team. But the quote that everyone's talking about right now is, quote, "When you get into these playoff games, you have to play your best. It's amazing how Baltimore's best players continue to come up to the smallest in the biggest games." And Booger talked a lot about, is it just they get too amped up for the playoffs? Do they put too much stock into it? Then that gets into everybody's head. But talking about players, coaches, whatever it may be, the Ravens do have to figure that out. Booger is not wrong about that. Now, I think him saying how Baltimore's best players continue to come up in the biggest games, I think it should be just the organization in general. I mean, obviously, the players have a part to play in this. I'm not trying to excuse them for that, but we have also seen coaching malpractice in some of these playoff losses. Not every single one. Like, again, I think that the playoff loss to Buffalo, I would put a lot more blame on John Harbaugh in that Chiefs loss or the Titans loss in 2019 than I would in that Bills loss. Not saying John has no blame in that loss either, because it is a team sport. Win as a team, lose as a team. That is the key here. But it's just been that same story. And the stuff that we've talked about ad nauseum over here on Locked On Ravens is like, does the regular season even matter anymore? The answer shortly is yes, it does. I mean, you have getting together and bonding and making sure that you are on the same page with your guys heading into the postseason, establishing trends with one another, finding out your strengths, finding out your weaknesses. That all is really, really big. Seeding is really, really big. I think, we talked about this and we continue to talk about it, where if the Ravens had just beaten the Raiders or beaten the Browns, we are talking about a divisional round in Baltimore instead of Buffalo. And the weather had a big part to play in that game. Having a game at M&T always boosts the Ravens. So that's something where it's just like, do your job in the regular season and you'll be able to set yourself up nicely for the playoffs. But setting yourself up nicely like they did in 2023, 2024 doesn't always work, isn't always the be-all, end-all. I don't know what it is. I mean, we heard multiple Ravens players talk about how last season, AFC Championship game, they were kind of bright-eyed, wide-eyed, and they were looking around like, oh, whoa, like we're here. Like, oh, wow, this is the championship game. And then you heard the shift this season where it was like, oh, yeah, we're here, and we know we're here, and you're going to know we're here too. And then, they obviously didn't let the Bills know they were there. They tried at the very end, but it just is mistake after mistake after mistake. And it's not for a lack of talent on the roster. It's not for a lack of talent on the coaching staff. It just feels like something, it's like a switch almost. And it doesn't always go off. Like, that's the crazy part to me. It doesn't always go off, to where the Ravens have such a poor playoff reputation. Honestly, I think that discourse has been trying to overcorrect on the Ravens is, I guess, the way I'd put it, where they're such a good regular season team. So obviously, and this is correct, obviously they're going to have high playoff expectations. That just is what it is. When you are that good in the regular season for as long as they have been, you're going to have high playoff expectations. And look, they've won 2 Super Bowls. They've won 2 Super Bowls in almost 30 years. Like, that is how good they have been. They've won 2 Super Bowls. Some teams haven't sniffed the Super Bowl for their entire franchise history. But this is a what have you done for me now lately league. And while I think that the Ravens have been unsuccessful on their playoff journeys, which obviously in today's ring culture is deemed by at least a Super Bowl appearance, if not a Super Bowl championship, right? the Ravens do perform well sometimes in the playoffs, right? Like that Houston game last season, the Pittsburgh game this season, the Tennessee game, not the 2019 one, obviously the one after that one. But Lamar, it's not like he just every single game he's in the playoffs just absolutely does nothing. But it's just those moments that the Ravens don't flip that switch on, or that they make too many mistakes. That is what happens far too often. We've talked about how the Ravens turn the ball over too much. They don't force turnovers in the postseason. In the 6 playoff losses in the Lamar Jackson playoff era where Lamar has started, the Ravens have, or I guess just not even Lamar started, just, the Ravens in general, there have been literally 15 turnovers by the Ravens and 2 forced turnovers. That's minus 13 in the turnover differential in the Lamar Jackson era. That can't happen. It just feels like the Ravens, they have those big playoff wins, right? But they don't come in the biggest moments. Like, yes, obviously winning the playoffs is a big deal. Divisional round against Houston, big deal. Pittsburgh game this year in the wild card, big deal. But then you go up against these Buffaloes, these Kansas Cities, and you can't get the job done. That's the thing you have to get over the hump with. And that is on the players. That is on the coaches. That is on everybody. So I think that the Ravens have had more playoff success than people give them credit for. But I think that their losses are so loud and they are the same thing over and over again that it is disappointing. And all of a sudden, every year this happens, we get to the regular season to start and we're like, okay, we're super excited. And yeah, the regular season is awesome. I love, kind of seeing a team evolve for the Ravens, hopefully in a good way over the course of regular season. But none of that matters when you hit the postseason. And it's part of the reason. It's not like we don't ever talk about those teams, but it's like you look at them in a much different light than you do. Like, what if the Ravens lost the Super Bowl in that 2012-2013 year? Like, what if they never made it there? We wouldn't really be mentioning Ray Lewis in his last ride because, well, his last ride, did it end in Foxborough? Did it end in Denver? Like, it's not as memorable. And you lose sight of those moments that, you work for an entire season. And like, they obviously still carry weight, but you don't want to look back on that season as much as you did for like the 2000, one of the greatest defenses ever to play the game. What if they didn't win the Super Bowl that season? Still would have been a great defense, but you're looking at that season differently. I'm not saying throw everything away, but it's just a different way to look at it. So the Ravens do have to get their playoff success together. That's why I think this year in 2025 is the make or break for John Harbaugh. If you've been listening to me over the last couple of seasons here on the show, I've been teetering of like, yeah, they could, but they're not going to. Like, that's just what I'm going to tell you here. This year, it's definitely like if the Ravens lose in the wild card, lose in the divisional, John Harbaugh, in my opinion, that should be that for him. And it's not because I think he's a terrible coach, because if you've been listening to me on the show, you also know I don't think that. But there's just a time where things run their course. There's a time where things expire. You can make an argument that John Harbaugh could have gone here, gone there, whatever it was. Lamar saved his job back in 2018, this, that, and the other. But you'd have 28 teams lining up out the door for him if he were a free agent head coach. But that doesn't mean that he is the right fit for the Ravens if they have another disappointing season. So that is where I am on that. Coming up in the final part of the show, we'll look at how John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta and this Ravens team can address their needs in the draft, because I think it's a different way that they should address it in free agency. So be sure to stay tuned. We got a lot coming up on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher, still talking with you on this Thursday. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. We've had a long journey on Locked On Ravens together, whether you're an everydayer, first-time listener, or somewhere in the middle. Been doing this show since 2019. This is episode 1149 consecutively for me. I've never missed a weekday episode on this show. It is my proudest, or one of my proudest accomplishments in life, to be able to say that literally every single weekday I show up here on Locked On Ravens, I talk about this Ravens team. Through the ups, through the downs, the heartbreak, the joy, always here for you on Locked On Ravens. So be sure to hit that like and subscribe button in video form and follow along in audio form for 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens coverage. Now, the way that I view needs, like off-season needs, I put it into a couple of different categories, because you can look at this roster, you can look at the free agents, you can look at performances, and you can say, well, they need an edge rusher, they need an defensive lineman, they need an offensive lineman, they need secondary help, they need wide receivers, whatever it may be. I think you split it up differently, though. And this, to me, is because of the ever-evolving market in the NFL, particularly at premium positions. And I'll use a position to start off that the Ravens don't need at all. Maybe a backup, but don't need it all, and that's a quarterback, right? Because you have Lamar Jackson. Look at the market this year. Sam Darnold is this guy who has been a journeyman. He revived his career in Minnesota, and he's going to get paid like $40 million. And these quarterback-needy teams might be looking at Sam Darnold and saying, wait, we don't want to pay this guy $40 million. We're just going to go look for a quarterback in the draft, right? Because some of these positions, the valuation of what these guys get, some of them deserve it, some of them maybe not so much, but the premium positions, the market is so inflated right now that you're paying $40 million for Sam Darnold. You have other problems, but one of them is doing that if you do. Because guys like Sam Darnold, who, yes, Sam had a nice season, right? He had a good year in Minnesota based off of expectations. But, for a team like Tennessee, who has the number one pick, and you're deciding between, do we pay Sam Darnold, a vet, $40 million, or do we go draft a Cam Ward or Shedeur Sanders? Well, the decision there is pretty simple. You go take the guy on the rookie contract. So now let's relate this to Ravens. Offensive line. We've seen guys like Robert Hunt get $100 million from the Panthers. We've seen guys like Damian Lewis get around $60 million from the Panthers as well. Ronnie Stanley's projected a $20 million contract per year. Patrick McCarry's projected a $10 million contract per year. The way that the Ravens have to operate with Lamar Jackson on his big deal, and others as well, it's not just a Lamar Jackson thing, you can't afford to give those big money premium position contracts out. You just can't do it. So when you talk about draft needs for the Ravens versus actual free agency needs, I don't think the free agency need is an offensive lineman. I don't think the Ravens should go spending money on an offensive lineman unless it is Ronnie Stanley or Patrick McCarry on a team-friendly deal. I think that the Ravens, unless you can get like an Alaric Jackson on a cheaper deal or someone like that, you should be looking in the draft, particularly at the tackle spot. Guards, it's a little bit of a different conversation, which is where Alaric Jackson kind of comes into the fray a little bit more. But for tackles in particular, that's a lot of money. So I think that if you can have both your tackles with Roger Rosengarten and a rookie on rookie deals, you're not going to overpay for somebody. And you're able to, again, keep the costs down at a premium position. It's why having Nate Wiggins on a rookie deal is so important. It's why having Rosengarten on that deal as well is so important. It's why having Zay Flowers in the market where receivers, we hear the rumors of Jamar Chase about to get $40 million per season. Justin Jefferson signed his big deal. I'm not saying Zay's deal is going to be that big, but in the reality, the Ravens have the best contract in the NFL on Rashod Bateman with his deal that he signed because of the whole fifth-year option snafu that happened with him and his agent and whatnot. But Zay Flowers, right? Kyle Hamilton, safeties are beginning to up that price. Now he's going to need an extension, but having him on the fifth-year option as well as Tyler Linderbaum and having them on their rookie deals for as long as they did, that is a very good thing because you're not necessarily saying, well, we have to pay $100 million here and $100 million there and $80 million here and 50 there. The way that the Ravens have to operate is hitting on their draft picks, hitting on veteran signings. And they did an impeccable job of that in 2023. 2024, they didn't really sign as many guys. So, there wasn't that track record. But in terms of like offensive tackle, yeah, if Ronnie Stanley leaves, like that's going to be a big need for them to replace Ronnie Stanley. But I'm not looking in free agency for that replacement. I'm looking in the draft because you have a lot of quality players, first, second, maybe even third round. If you want to get a little spicy, you can do that. Corner's another position like that with a guy like Nate Wiggins we can use as an example like that. They could go out there and get a Jair Alexander, right? That's been one of my dreams on this show for as long as I've been hosting it. But you also have Nate Wiggins, who is giving you top corner production at an incredible price. So it's about hitting your draft picks and then filling in the cracks free agency wise. You know, a lot of teams like to spend in free agency, and it works for some, but the Ravens have had their bread and butter by having guys on rookie contracts, signing their own guys to extensions, and then filling in the cracks with guys in free agency. It's why, you know, that first day of free agency, you know, we're going to try to do a lot of stuff for that day for the Ravens and just kind of be on top of it. And we'll go live if they have any signings or whatnot. And we'll go live after the day if nothing happens. But usually not a lot happens on that day for the Ravens because they like to see the market develop. They're not that like active, we're going to go in there and spend $50 million on guys off the bat on day one, because they like to see how the market develops, figure out who's still available, who they can maybe get on the cheap, right? On the down low cheap. And then in the draft, they can say, hey, we're giving this guy a 5th-year option, first-round pick. We're going to have him for 4 or 5 years on a relatively low-cost deal, premium position. And that's why the Ravens' best player available really works for them, because surprisingly, a lot of the guys that fall, or maybe not so surprisingly, a lot of the guys that fall, premium position players. You know, Marlon Humphrey wasn't expected to be there at, you know, when the Ravens drafted. I think it was 16 when the Ravens drafted him. He wasn't expected to be there at that point, but he was too good to pass up. And so you do that, and then you usher in another premium position player on a rookie contract. There are so many examples of that happening for this team. So free agency needs for the Ravens, you can talk about edge, you can talk about D-lineman, you can talk about guard potentially, wide receiver, like a vet guy. But in the draft, I'm also looking at a safety potentially, you know, depending on what they want to do there. I'm looking at offensive tackle there, wide receiver, depending on who's available. There are other needs, edge, you know, and all the free agency needs go into draft needs depending on what happens. But if the Ravens go and trade for a big edge rusher, they're not going to take one in the early rounds of the draft, right? That's not how it works. So Baltimore has an intriguing offseason ahead. I'm really excited to continue to cover that over here on Locked On Ravens. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. So thank you so much for tuning into the show. Coming up tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week with more Ravens coverage. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Hit the like and subscribe button on the way out in video form and in audio form. Follow along and subscribe as well. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.